Welcome to Swift Coaches Academy, a podcast dedicated to bringing exercise and health professionals the uncensored truth behind what it really takes to succeed in the health industry with me, your host, Zenia Wood. As an accredited exercise physiologist and the founder of Swift Coaches Academy with almost a decade of experience, I'm on a mission to transform the lives of ambitious health professionals who want more and are ready to take action to create incredible impact and financial freedom. So join me as I speak candidly with industry leaders about the struggles and successes from within the trenches through thought-provoking conversations.
In this episode, we have Zenia's conversation with fellow accredited exercise physiologist and head of exercise rehab at Swift Movement Academy, David Adamo. Get ready for a captivating conversation as Zenia and David delve into the topic of muscle function versus muscle action and provide valuable insights and practical tips. If you're a health professional or exercise coach, don't miss a moment of this episode.
Back again, David, ready for another educational podcast. How are you feeling?
Yeah, good. Been looking forward to it. Everything's going well. Knees feeling better, which is good. So, yeah, back into it.
I love it. Okay, so we are going to talk about muscle function versus action today. We alluded to this a little bit in our last education podcast together. And today we're going to dive in a little bit deeper onto what this means. We've had some questions and people asking us about, function versus action. And can you give more examples? So here it is. Do you want to kick us off with, again, just defining muscle function versus action, and then maybe we can talk about this in terms of like hip stability, glute med, things like that.
Yeah, perfect. So we've got muscle action. Muscle action is when a muscle performs a certain movement. So it is, either externally rotating, internally rotating, abducting, flexing. That's muscle action. The function of a muscle is when it's resisting movement. Okay, so there's external forces. It's more of an isometric contraction most of the time, and it's helping to stabilize, the bone or joint that it's crossing. So that's more the muscle function.
Perfect. Awesome. And so if we look at this in terms of the hip, and people often, jump to glute med, even though glute med actually does exactly the same thing. However, we talk about, the glute med being a primary stabilizer of the hip, and a lot of people tend to jump and gravitate towards this, especially as like a rehab exercise. But the problem I see is that they're performing the muscle action, not the muscle function. So do you want to maybe give an example of each of these for everyone, and why we need to be incorporating, I guess, the function side of things?
Yeah. I think the best way to always describe these things is with a case study. So we had somebody come in the other week, and in our testing experience, our rehab reset testing experience, we had a look at their hip abduction strength and hip adduction, all around the hip joint to test the muscles. And he was freaking strong. He was strong in all the different movements, right? But still had, a bit of hip, bit of knee pain, bit of low back pain, a bit, looking at the muscles as individuals, they were all super strong, stronger than what we see in most. But then when we got him doing more hip stability tests, you could see it was just all falling apart.
And so just for everyone who's listening, what's a stability test? What are you doing?
So what my favorite go-to is, and one that I learned at Swift, is the flamingo, the all famous Swiss ball flamingo. So
just quickly on that, I have to tell this story. You know that I tried to call it the Zenia. Did you know that?
No.
I was working as a subcontractor, and I was like, no, this is the way it needs to be done. I modified it and I changed a few things, and I was like, it's called the Zenia, and everyone just looked at me and laughed, and I was like, fuck, all right, well, I need to give it a new name. And people calling it like the single leg sprinter spitball wall squat, and I was like, fuck that, no one's gonna remember that, it's too long, I'm not writing that down. I was like, just call it the Zenia, it'll be easy.
Don't remember it.
But then I actually recoined the term as the flamingo. I don't know how far past Brisbane it's extended, but I know that, there were like 50 of us who worked at this place together, and everyone started calling it the flamingo. So, we're trying to put it out there. So if anyone else just Google the Flamingo Swift Movement Academy, it'll come up on YouTube.
We might have to put the link in the bio to the show notes of this about the way we perform it, because people will be like, what the hell are you talking about?
So it is like a single leg Swiss ball against a wall. We typically put the ball on the knee, not on the hip, because we're trying to stabilize the hip. You don't want people to sort of sag and like fall into the ball with their hip. So the idea is to stabilize the pelvis and the hip. And so basically you're saying that this client that we had who went through their testing, really, really strong muscle action, but the actual function of their muscle was lacking. And it's important to actually be able to see and test both of these things, so that we're not just looking at one piece of data and going, oh, but they're really strong. Why? Because stability and strength, whilst correlated, are really on a continuum, right? Stability, if you're really, really stable, then you can produce a lot of force. But if you're less stable, then we're focusing more on, skill and things like that. So flamingo being our stability test, or, even our single leg, lower body Y balance test, or things like that. And then we test strength through, should probably mention, test strength through the Access Strength by Numbers force plates. And they have a pull it, a push it, and some force plates that are kind of like weight plates for people to stand on. And when they produce force, we can see how much force is going through each leg and things like that. Really, really cool, high-tech, advanced world-class equipment that we've invested in. And that way we're getting objective data too. So, you get most traditional health professionals who will resist against their hand and be like, oh, this one feels stronger. And it's like, okay, but did you push harder? Like, how do I know week on week that you haven't pushed harder? Because I don't remember what happened 3 weeks ago when I came in. Like, this really takes the human error out of it and provides some objective data, which is critical for not just insights, but improving performance and making sure that our programs are working. So a little bit of a tangent on how we run things. So if we come back to glute med or hip abduction, rather, really strong, flamingo really sucked. But what do most people do in terms of, like, if someone gets told their glute med is weak? Like, what's the thing that you hear that all the clients are doing, being told from other health professionals or Google searching?
It's got to be the traditional crab walk. Has to be that,
or like a seated
some
clam
sort of mini bend.
or something. Yeah, there's a mini bend involved for sure. And
get the burn.
Why do we not? It's not our favorite go-to to use a mini bend.
Same as what we've been talking about. That's, you use a mini band, you're working more the action of the muscle. With the clam, you're going into more external rotation. With the side lying leg lift, you're going into more abduction, which is, fine if you're working the muscle for working that specific muscle and its action. But when it comes to the stability and the function of the muscle, it's not doing much for it at all.
And the other thing, same with why TheraBands aren't our first choice. I get if you're home gymming it, like, it might be the option that you have. But if you've got access to a cable machine, then you can have relatively constant tension. And this gets into a little bit more of the biomechanics, but it's not hard to understand that when you pull a band, the further you pull, the harder it gets. And so it's hardest in your most lengthened position. If you're doing, let's say, hip abduction, probably not going to get to your most lengthened position because the band stops you before that. And so you're in a lengthened, shortened position, Oh yeah, the muscles in the most shortened position. Yeah, sorry. I mean the movement, you're at like the extent of good pickup. But with that, it's like we know that our muscles are strongest in their mid-range. And so we're forcing them to their end range, whether shortened or lengthened. In this case, shortened, like you said. And that's where it's hardest for our muscles. And you're also adding the most resistance. So it's like a double whammy that's not helping us at all. Whereas when we can use a cable, it's not exact because you have to look at moment arms and it's going to change the more you abduct or things like that. However, if you're, let's say, performing a single leg hip abduction exercise, if you're standing right beside the cable, you hold on with your right arm, your right leg is planted on the floor, and the cable ankle braces around your left ankle, and then you abduct away, you're going to get, 30 degrees with very, very similar tension on that abduction. But the benefit of that is not only do you train the action on one side, but the other leg is stabilizing. Yeah. Right? Like you lay on the ground. This is why Pilates is a great first step for people, or an integrated thing if you need that. However, it can't be the only thing that you're doing. Like it can't be the only thing that you are doing, because you need to get up and walk and function in standing positions. And, obviously Pilates has come a long way from just being on a mat. And I understand there's reformers and there's resistance and things like that. But if we look at, traditional mat work, Pilates or booty band based exercises, it is quite limited in what it can do, especially if someone's trying to return to performance. It's like, where's the integration piece? And are we getting them up and standing? And if your Pilates is doing that, then that's fucking awesome. But I don't see it happening often enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially in like prehab or warm-up programs as well. Like clams and all these sorts of booty burning exercises before your, big compound lifts of squats and deadlifts and stuff. And it's like, well, you're just getting a little bit of, you could argue you're getting a little bit of blood flow through the muscle and a little bit of, heat to the muscle to get it warmed up in a way. But when we're looking at lifting these crazy amounts of loads, we want to be stable. You said before that you produce the most force when you're the most stable, right? You're not going to be able to jump super high off a Bosu ball, but you're going to be able to jump super high off a floor when it's nice and stable. So the same thing applies. It's like, let's start looking at taking away these, mini band warm-up exercises in prehab work or warm-up stuff, and let's actually get the function of muscles working, and you're going to have much better outcomes, I think, with your training.
Absolutely. I was listening to Brett Contreras, who's the glute guy, who I've actually had the pleasure of meeting in person and spent like a couple of days with. It was fucking incredible.
With the glute lab, Did you went there?
So this is when it was in San Diego. It's in Vegas now. But he's an incredibly knowledgeable dude, super smart, super down to earth. And the cool thing is that he puts out some really cool stuff. I was listening to some on YouTube from a couple of years back, and he was talking about, like, being the glute guy, you would assume he'd be all over booty bands. But he's like, no, just fucking do full range lunges and squats as your warm up and just move your entire body. And he says that because he gives you like fucking 20 literature reviews of research papers of randomized control trials because he's such a nerd. And he's like, the research says it's better. And I'm just like, thank God that there is someone out there who's actually giving us research-based information on glutes. That's where all of the booty band industry sort of came from. And he's like, nah, all my girls are squatting full depth and doing high box step-ups with cables and, hip thrusting full range of motion. And sure, they'll have a fucking finisher if they feel like they want their glutes to feel sore when they walk out of there. But I'm telling them that that's not going to be the thing that gets them the results, because that's not going to, work it through its full range. So, I think obviously he really understands the function and the action and being able to integrate those, and something that is functional serves its purpose. And so the function can be to, be strong or to move through range. But I guess our definition of muscle function is, what is its role when it's isometrically contracting, like you said at the start? And I think thinking about it that way can really help to differentiate what you're trying to do, right?
Big time. Like, with that client that came in super strong on all the movements individually, but then, bring them together, integrating them. And as a footballer, you're on one leg most of the time. You're kicking off one leg, you're sprinting off one leg, you're landing on one leg most of the time. And it's like, these are the positions where you want to be the most stable. So it doesn't matter how strong you are in each individual one, you want to make sure they're all working as a unit. And that's where you're going to get the best performance.
Yeah, Absolutely. This one's talked about a reasonable amount, and I think some people will be pretty aware of it, but I think it's relevant to go back over and maybe go a little deeper into the function versus the action of our core, because most people are like, I want to train my core or get stronger in my core. And it's like, well, what do you mean by that, right? Because we need to articulate the goals of our clients and really understand their definition, because it could be, I want to be leaner. And it's like, well, okay, maybe look at your nutrition first. Or maybe it's, I want to, like some of our football players, it's like, I feel unstable on my, or unsteady, and I feel like someone can knock me and I'm not able to resist that. So let's go through core function versus action.
Yeah. To keep it real simple, you've got the action. Okay, you've got all the muscles of the trunk is essentially your core. But if we think more, TA, rectus abdominis, internal, external obliques, we've got flexion of the trunk. We've got lateral flexion of the trunk both ways. We've got rotation of the trunk both ways, and then we've got spinal extension. Right, which not a lot of people categorize as the core, but it is. But if we just acknowledge that, if
you're talking about the posterior core, meaning like your erectors and your QL and things like that.
And then we have the function, which everything is always somewhat a little bit more confusing, where this is, you just put an anti in front of it and it's the function. You've got anti-extension, you've got anti-rotation, and you've got anti-lateral flexion. And then we're talking about the function of the core.
So if we have our core action examples, these ones should be super easy. So the action of our core in terms of flexion is going to come from things like crunches, right? Traditional exercises for our core. Lateral flexion would be things like, like ankle taps, or, holding a weight plate. Again, there's some challenges with that in terms of biomechanics, but, you will get a little bit of resisted lateral flexion if we hold the weight in the opposite hand. So we're going against. So let's say I'm holding the weight in my right hand, I'm laterally flexing to my left to crunch against that weight, or even putting a cable pegged right at the very bottom and then resisting that way, or rotation. So Russian twists or bicycle crunches or whatever. Those are going to be our core actions. Do you want to run us, Dave, through our core functions? So we've got anti-extension, anti-lateral flexion, and anti-rotation.
Yeah, of course. So for your anti-extension, you've got your plank, or your traditional plank or dead bug type of movement. For your anti-lateral flexion, you've got your side plank. That's probably the easiest to go to for anti-lateral flexion. And then you've got your last one, which is anti-rotation, and that's some sort of Pallof press. They're quite big, cable or banded and things like that. So the function, we're resisting the movement that wants to happen.
Yeah, awesome. Easy. And so why would I, if we're talking about now, okay, well, that's just 6 different things you've given me, action and function, to integrate into a program. Do you program this in terms of, I need to fit everything into every program, or do you go like, okay, this person needs to focus on function only or action only, or how are you doing that with our clients at the moment?
Yeah, so it's, again, depends on the client, that lovely depending word. It depends on clients. So I'll admit, a lot of the time you'd always hear about the function or the anti-movements, and just prescribing so much anti-movements. But when especially with the population we look at most of the time, a lot of sedentary people, a lot of people who aren't getting much movement, it's like, why are we wanting to, reinforce being stuck in those positions through doing anti or the function of the core, when that's what I've turned to lately as well, is people that aren't moving a lot actually get better results with low back pain and things like that when we prescribe them more of the action movements. of the core. And that's what I've found anecdotally, right, at the moment with myself and my clients, is that, you get somebody low back pain. Okay, we need to strengthen the core in its function, right? Which everybody seems to know. When it comes to the shoulder and the hip, not so much. But when it comes to the core, we all know about it because it's your traditional plank holds and things like that. And you give them, you don't see them getting better, and I understand that that's a variety of factors, but at the end of the day, you start giving them more gentle movements like crunches and things like that, which, for a period of time, I felt started to become a little frowned upon when you were training core. It was like, oh, you're not doing a hold, or you're not doing a stabilizing exercise. Exactly. Context dependent, right? You've got those people, but then on the other hand, you might have sports athletes where you do want to train the function, right? You have a 80-kilo rugby player coming up against the 120-kilo forward. You're going to want them to have a little bit more ability to resist forces, right? So that's where we come into the function and the anti-movements. We want them to train quite strong positions of those, so they're more robust and resilient on the field. When it comes back to your question about programming, no, I don't believe you need to have them all in at once, because that could be a whole day of just going and training flexion, rotation, that, and then the antis of it. So I don't think so. But what I love is the fact that these are things that can be integrated to other exercises as well, right? Let's take a lunge or a split squat, for an example. Hold a heavy ass weight on one side, and you're performing anti-lateral flexion through the whole movement.
Yeah. Or
right?
even things like farmers walks and suitcase carries or single arm carries and things like that. And you see people and they just hold to one side and they're flopped over, and you're like, can you just, the goal is to be straight so that we can actually carrying the weight is part of the task. But if you want anti-lateral flexion or even anti-rotation that you're going to get from the slight movement of the weight that's in the hand as you're walking, it's like, let's actually get you to resistance. It's going to feel weird, like you're sort of almost falling into the weight, but you actually look at yourself in a mirror and you'd be upright if you're using a heavy enough load to resist that. So I think that's a great point. Like, let's integrate these into other exercises, so we're not trying to give clients 700 exercises to complete in a week. And also on the topic of not training every single thing every single week or even every single programming block, but you said that we train the anti-movements particularly in athletes, and then the muscle actions in our rehab or our more sedentary clients, and that might be initially right, but then remembering that if Jane, who's 85, is trying to get up the stairs and something's going to throw her off or whatever, and she needs to also have those bracing movements. I know that you prescribe this, but just, I guess, to clarify, it's like, it's not as if that's a blanket rule of like, we only do resisting forces or muscle function with athletes and only do muscle action with our more sedentary clients. There is integration, absolutely. And, looking at how do we slowly start to integrate the muscle function for these people who have been moving less, but maybe understanding that their first point of call is not resisted forces and holding positions, because they just need to generally expend more energy and move more and create a bigger vocab of movement before they start to resist some of those forces.
Yeah, no, totally understand, and totally on board with you with that one. There's everybody should be doing all of them in a way, right? Not all at once, but that's where the beauty of phases come into play with programming. You might, have a phase where you're focusing on the resisting and the function of the core, and then a phase of not, or they can be integrated as well, right? If you look at the movements we do from the moment we get out of bed to the moment we get into bed at night, they're consisting of all of those. We're resisting forces and we're producing movement through, every movement that we do each day. So you can't go wrong if you've got a mixture of them in your program. Let's put it that way. And
also remembering that the gym is to prepare you for life, not the other way around. We're not trying to prepare for the gym unless you're a gym or a barbell sport athlete. And so if you are moving more in your daily life, like athletes do, you probably need to learn how to resist. And if you are moving less, you probably need to learn how to move. So, I think that's probably a great point to sort of finish up on. But let's go back to our actionable or our take home for today. I reckon it's got to be about just bringing awareness to muscle function and action. What do you reckon?
Yeah, big time, especially if you are listening to this as a PT or EP or physio, whatever it is. A takeaway is your client in front of you might be strong as in these movements, right? But let's look at them integrated. Let's look at the function of these muscles, and you can start to see some patterns. And then it gives you a bit of guidance as to where to go with your initial programming or initial prescription or whatever it may be. And it opens up a whole new world as opposed to, hey, let's go strengthen your glute med, right? What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Are we strengthening the function or the action?
Exactly. Let's different.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, I think it's probably important also to mention that coming up pretty soon, we have our anatomy mastery course, which I'm so stoked for. Anatomy mastery for exercise professionals, 8 weeks of really nailing anatomy, integrating that into these, the function, the action, and understanding anatomy and how it relates to exercise prescription specifically. I haven't heard of anything out there like this before, so I believe this is, realistically a world first where we're actually taking anatomy and integrating it into exercise for exercise professionals or anyone who uses exercise as part of their treatment, so allied health professionals too, and making sure that you can actually create incredible programs whilst being able to not only understand and articulate the anatomy, but get great results with clients. So I'm so keen for that.
Yeah, me too. I'm gonna hop in on that too.
All right. I will talk to you next time.
Awesome. See ya. Have a good day.
See ya.
If you enjoyed this episode, it'd honestly mean the world to us if you could share it with a friend or on your socials, follow and leave a quick review so that we can bring you more real, raw and uncensored stories from industry leaders. We also love hearing your feedback, so please DM us on Instagram at Swift Coaches Academy if you have suggestions for future guests or topics. Until next time, and in whatever you do, move swiftly.